Hello and welcome to another episode of RE Radar. Once again, I am your host and realtor, Nathan Matheson, and thank you so much for watching and listening. If you haven't joined us on the radar before, let me tell you a little bit about the mission here. This podcast is simply a tool to help educate buyers, sellers, and really anyone just interested in learning a little bit more about real estate. Real estate is a very complex industry, and I'm here to help the average person understand it just a bit better. On this week's episode, how I'm going to be doing that for you guys is by answering a few questions. On my Instagram, I put up a poll asking for first-time homebuyer questions. What is it that you're wondering? What is it that you're curious about? And so I got a few answers back on that. And so a few of these questions that I'm going to be going over, I'll go more in depth on and really hammer down because some of them, there are a lot of layers to it. Others, I'll move quickly through. But we'll see if we have time for all the questions on this episode. Otherwise, I think I'm pretty likely going to split this into 2 episodes. So starting right off, I'm going to go over the question I got that I think is a question on a lot of people's minds. And that's simply, what will the market be like in 6 months? And then what will it be like in a year here in Seattle? And that's the question everyone is always wondering. Everyone is always looking to predict that. But that's all it ever can be, is a prediction, an educated guess. Nobody really knows what the market's going to be like down the road. But before we do get in predicting what happens next year, I'd like to take a step back a little bit and touch just a bit on 2024 and what this real estate market has brought us, as often the previous year's market is what's going to foreshadow what's upcoming. So if I were to sum up 2024's market into one word, I would say uncertainty. Uncertainty for a number of reasons. It was an election year. That always brings uncertainty to the real estate market. And then, of course, the uncertainty with the interest rates. For a lot of 2024, rates were around 7%, and then they got into the 6% range, but mostly stayed in the high 6% range to 7% range. However, the talk throughout all of 2024 has been the Fed was going to cut rates in September, and this would then have an effect on interest rates. As we saw, the Fed did cut the Fed fund rate, but did we see the interest rate drop? No. The interest rate actually slightly increased. Now, I will say, though, in 2024, the sales were improved from 2023. However, these sales in 2024, home sales, was still well below the recent trends we had been seeing. So yes, it's better than last year, but there's still room to improve on the real estate market. Now, 2025, if 2024 was the year of uncertainty, I think 2025 is a year where there's a little more firm answers out there and there's a little more stuff that gets done. We are at a stage in the real estate market here in Seattle where, if historic trends were to tell you anything, this is one of the biggest backlogs of buyers just waiting on the sidelines that we've had here in Seattle in a long time. People are ready to move. It's just a question of, does that one thing fall into place that pushes them over the edge to be willing to sell and be willing to buy somewhere else? Now, what is that one thing? Unless it's a move out of pure necessity, more than likely a driving factor, I think, for a lot of people on the sidelines is that interest rate. And while a lot of people might point towards the presidential cycle as having a big impact on interest rates, I mentioned that as uncertainty. Yes, that's uncertainty with who's going to be elected, but it doesn't actually have a huge effect on interest rates. As if you look at the trends on this graph I have popped up on the screen, if you're watching on YouTube, showcases the presidential election cycle and mortgage rate changes. The biggest one you'll see here is of minus 0.8% and then plus 0.58%. So really not huge changes in the interest rate more often than not. And that's kind of what we've seen with this election as well. Not huge interest rate movers after the election. So what does affect the interest rate? And I think a better question to ask might be, what doesn't affect interest rates? So let me just rattle off the list of things that are calculated in and help to influence and move interest rates up or down. You've got the Federal Reserve policies, inflation, economic growth, employment levels, global factors, market sentiment and supply and demand for loans, government debt, and fiscal policies. Long list right there. So, for the people who had expected the interest rates to drop when the Fed cut rates, and they didn't, and they slightly went up, the Fed is not all that matters. You've got a number of factors in there, and that is one of those major reasons why it is so hard to predict what the interest rate is going to be doing, what the market is going to be doing, because there's a lot of factors that influence it. So now that I've laid out a few facts here and laid out what I see as the biggest influencers on the real estate market, my prediction for the market in 6 months, which I'm going to call June, is interest rates will be down to around 6.2 to 6.1%. Right now, they're sitting around 6.9% when I recorded this video on December 4th. And I think by June, in 6 months, they're down in that 6.2 range, maybe 6.3 range. And I do believe then, with that rate in that low 6% range, and with how many people are on the sidelines waiting to buy, and with it being the spring summer market, I think we will see a big influx of homes for sale, thus bringing in more buyers as well, and pump this market back up to what has maybe been seen as typical in Seattle over the last 5-6 years. Which, of course, what that typical market here in Seattle is still going to be a seller's market. It's still going to be a seller's market in 2025. I've seen some people maybe throw out the idea that it could shift to a buyer's market. I just don't see that happening, because a good metric for sellers versus buyer's market is months of supply inventory, which that is how long will it take to sell all the current inventory at the current rate. When that number is lower than 6, it's a seller's market. The sellers have the advantage. When it's more than 6 months, the buyers then get the advantage. It's a buyer's market. So Seattle hasn't had a month supply inventory of 6 since July 2011, when it was 6.2, which that is actually more of a balanced market. And then October 2010 was the last time it went into a buyer's market of getting into the 7-month supply inventory. Now, this past September, the month supply inventory hit 3 months, which is the highest it had been since September of 2014. But now in November, that number dropped back to 2.2 months. So nothing here indicates that that number is anywhere close to shifting over towards a buyer's market. So 2025 is going to be a seller's market, where I feel we will see an interest rate dip into that low 6% range, and then just that interest rate lowering down there, maybe if it holds steady in that low 6% range for a couple of months, it is going to bring these buyers from the sidelines back into it and create a hot spring market where it is going to be multiple offer situations, and more often than not, you are going to pay above the list price for the best homes on the market. By the end of 2025, then, for a year out, I could see that interest rate getting under 6%. I could see it in that 5.9% range, and kind of helping to fuel a stronger than usual winter real estate market in Seattle. Winter in Seattle is a very slow point in the Seattle real estate market, but I see, with the spring market picking up and that interest rate, if it can hold steady in the low 6% range before getting into the high 5s range by the end of the year, I think it will bring a strong spring market that then pushes over into the fall and winter market. So 2025, I think the second half of that year is going to be slightly stronger than traditional for amount of sales and listings coming up, because, like I've been talking about, that backlog of buyers is going to eventually have to make a decision where, all right, we've waited long enough, it's time to go. And I think 2025 is that year. Of course, what does this mean? It means, well, it's actually a better deal, I would say, to buy now than waiting, because you wait, like I'm saying, huge competition. Well, right now the competition is much lower. You can negotiate better on making offers. But if you wait, Yes, you're going to get those lower interest rates. So perhaps you're going to be able to be approved for your mortgages. Maybe you can't get into a house you like right now. You're trying to wait till you can get a better approval with the lower interest rates. When in fact, that might be a big mistake, as when interest rates drop, home prices typically have just gone up. That's what we've seen historically trends. Interest rates low, home prices high. Interest rates high, like they are right now, 6.9%. Home prices are kind of subdued a little bit traditionally. So that wraps up my market predictor. I think it's going to be a hot market 2025. I think it's still going to be a seller's market, and I think it's going to be multiple offer situations. I think the real estate market will bring in a lot of buyers 2025, including the end of 2025. Now, next question I've got right here is, when is the best and worst time to buy? So I do have a full episode that kind of discusses this. I did that back on season 1, I believe. So I will on the YouTube have this linked so you can check that out if you want a better, more thorough report. But what I'll give is a quick summary here of what I went over in that episode. And first off, there's a couple factors I think when you mean by best and worst time to buy. I touched on them just recently with the interest rates. Do you buy when they are high or low? And this is obviously dependent on your situation. But if you could, like I've been saying, I would recommend buying a home when interest rates are higher, because when interest rates are higher, there's less competition. Home prices can be slightly suppressed compared to when interest rates are low. Everyone is trying to buy because money is cheap and everyone can afford to buy a home. And this also then can cause home prices to be inflated. So if you buy now with higher interest rates and then refinance when rates drop, you could be saving huge chunks of money. The other factor of when to buy is time of year. Again, this is dependent on your situation, obviously. But I feel potentially for the best time to buy, if you're looking to get the best deal, it could be in the wintertime. Winter is kind of a dead period of real estate in Seattle with the holidays and the bad weather. Nobody wants to deal with a move. Moving is a big hassle. But this is kind of a two-edged sword. So yes, in the wintertime, you can get better deals with homes sitting on the market for longer, lower prices potentially, but inventory also is lower. So that can constrain your options and limit your pool of potential homes to buy. But then again, this means less competition. It allows for you to negotiate more favorable terms. You compare that to a buyer in the springtime. This is when kind of everyone is looking to buy. Everyone's trying to buy a home before the summer in Seattle. And competition is much more fierce. So in the winter, you get the cheaper priced home, but have less options. So if you're looking for something unique or very specific, you might want to be waiting more to springtime. That would give you better odds at finding this unique property. But if you're not super exact on your criteria, maybe it's your first home and you're just trying to get into home ownership, I would definitely recommend looking in wintertime and finding something you like, because there are still homes out there for sale in the winter. There are great homes, and that can save you money. And another quick point to make just on this topic of winter versus spring and summer, if you love a home, how it looks in the winter, you're probably guaranteed to love it even more during the spring and summer when it's nicer out. The winter, it's going to look the worst. The spring and summer, it's going to look the best. That's another thing to keep in mind. When you're shopping in the spring and summer, think about what is it going to be like when there's no light, when it's raining all the time. Now, the third question that I'm going to get to here, and I think that's probably going to be the only one I get to in this episode, just 3 questions. So we'll do another episode with these as well. Do I need a 20% down payment? And then what should I expect to put down? So here I'll have linked is on the YouTube, I'll have linked a video to the podcast I did with Tina Mitchell, who is Highland's senior loan officer. And we talked on this topic about down payments. But to answer this question quickly, no. You do not need 20% down in order to buy a home. And if you're a veteran, you can even get a VA loan where it's a $0 down payment. And then for non-veterans, there are also great options with low down payments. You can get an FHA loan for as low as 3.5%, And even some conventional Fannie and Freddie Mac loans with different first time home buyer programs and assistance, you can get as low as 3% down. The idea that you need 20% is a misconception. What it is if you're in a conventional loan or FHA loan where the down payment is less than 20%, you'll have a private mortgage insurance payment. And that PMI typically falls between 0.1% and 2% annually of the loan. Don't worry though, with a conventional loan, that PMI is not going to be for the life of the loan. You can get it removed once that LTV gets to the 80%. So essentially, once you've paid 20% down on that loan, you can request to get it removed, or it'll also be automatically removed once that LTV gets to 78%. So what should you expect to put down when you're buying a home? Now, this depends on your situation, because this is another strategy for you to use in figuring out how to get into a home. If you have a large amount of money put away and are having a large amount of money coming in, or just a decent steady flow of money coming in, then I would try to get a 20% down, because the more you put down, the smaller your loan is going to be with lower monthly payments. But if you're in a situation where maybe you don't have a big, massive amount of money saved away, which a lot of people I'm sure don't, but then maybe you're starting a new job and your salary is very high, you could then get into a home with a lower down payment, say maybe get a 10% down, and you start your home ownership, you start building up equity sooner than if you were to have to wait until 20%. If you were to have to wait and you kept saving up money trying to get that 20% down payment, you could very likely spend a whole lot more money, because Seattle real estate in recent history has just gone up and up and up in value. So each month you wait, that home gets more and more expensive. And you might not be saving up money at the same rate that that home is going up in value. So if your circumstances warrant it, don't be afraid to buy a home with less than 20% down. I think that's what I'd say most. Just don't be afraid of doing that. Do your research, talk to a mortgage professional like Tina Mitchell, and figure out what the best strategy for you is with buying that home and getting into home ownership. Now, yes, I think we're going to make this into a two-parter. So thank you very much for my listeners. Thank you very much for my watchers. I will be back in 2 weeks with the second part of this episode. So stay tuned for that, where we tackle a few more great first-time home buyer questions. Until then, peace.